They said after the 22nd day of the bombing had ended and there was a lull, and I just want to say that by the time I'd gone back to New York City, the home of one of these students had been partially collapsed by another round of bombing. But they said that the fighting between Hamas and Fatah had been more frightening for them. I suppose there's some confidence that, to a certain extent, the bombs are precise, and if you evacuate the area you've been told to evacuate, you might survive. And this was even after they'd seen some of the tremendous wreckage. I mean, their route to school was marked by collapsed buildings, and when they were with us in the intensive care unit in the hospital, it was very difficult, and they had also gone up to Al-Atatra. But even in spite of all that, they just found that the kind of more totally unpredictable chaos that had broken out during that fighting was very, very frightening for them. I guess it was about 10 minutes, really, after we had settled into the house where we stayed our first night, there was a knock on the door, and two young, very, like, 17-year-old Hamas adherents came to find out who were we, which I think is fair. You know, you're in a war zone, people want to know, you know, who's this. And then they went and got a religious leader who came back and had a very interesting discussion with Jim Jennings. Jim had actually taught Islam and other world religions at Wheaton College, and he was only there for one night, and then he left the next morning. But the religious leader and Jim had an exchange, and I think the religious leader wanted to know, why doesn't Jim convert to Islam? But Jim started to talk about Islam at great length, really, and so that was that one. There is a prison inside of Gaza City that was called the Saraya prison, and it had been completely collapsed. And I, with some occasional experiences inside a prison as a prisoner, felt concerned, and I kept saying, well, shouldn't we go find out what happened to the prisoners? And it was almost as though I had said, would you like to hold my scorpion? People, did not, and finally, I kept pressing it, and then I asked a Gazan journalist, do you want to see what happened at that? And I realized, stop asking this question. So my sense is that if people are not part of Hamas, they don't want to call attention to themselves, asking a lot of questions. I think there was certainly a sense of uncertainty, what's going to happen next? Who's going to be able to get the wherewithal to rebuild? There's so much rebuilding that has to happen. And yet, the morning I left, there was a drilling whir. I woke up thinking, am I at the dentist? And I realized, oh, there was somebody's drilling a tunnel right outside the window. And that isn't why we left, honestly. But there's just nothing terribly covert about these tunnels. There were 1,700 tunnels. You could probably imagine it, just think that under your cupboard or under your kitchen or your pantry, there was a trap door or something and a hole down, 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 and then the tunnel goes from the Egyptian side of the border to the Gazan side of the border. Now, some of the tunnels are really quite advanced. They have tile roofing or electric pulleys installed. The going rate for a human being to take a trip through the tunnel would have been $3,000, well beyond my budget. But people would come up to us when we were waiting, trying to get into Gaza and say, do you want to see my tunnel? They didn't know me from Adam's house cat. So this to me, made it pretty clear that the tunnel industry was not something that was a covert or underground kind of thing. Now, why are there all these tunnels? Well, Johanna and I and Peter and others in this room, Joanne, we went over to Iraq when it was under economic siege, and we could understand. I mean, if people could have built a tunnel, they would have built with their bare hands. It's a very demeaning, degrading way to try and get fuel or food or water or medicine or baby diapers or pots and pans, but everything was cut off. The January 7th article in the Washington Post by Jimmy Carter was so well done because he talked about how he and his wife Rosalind had gone to Sderot on the Israeli side of the border, and their hearts went out to the people in that Israeli town because they had to cower from, the wailing of sirens and always seek shelter in bombs. And he said that's a terrible thing to subject anyone to, especially children. But he continued. The ceasefire that then had been negotiated on January 19th, June 19th, 2008, stipulated two very clear agreements that the siege would be lifted inasmuch as restricted goods would now be allowed into Gaza and the crossing points would be opened. And in 2005, when Israelis formerly lived as settlers in Gaza, typically 750 trucks would cross the border every day, bringing in needed goods. You clamp down and you don't allow 750 trucks every day to come in, of course the economy of Gaza collapsed. Of course people were experiencing serious malnutrition, 45% unemployment. They couldn't get anything in, so they dug these tunnels. Now, I wouldn't be too surprised to find out that there were Kalashnikovs being shipped through, maybe bullets, maybe components for Qassam rockets. I don't know, I don't have the evidence, but it wouldn't surprise me. But can you imagine the breadth and the depth of the tunnel that would have to be built to accommodate what the United States has annually given to Israel? Just imagine with me a tunnel. It'd have to be like the Grand Canyon, the eighth wonder of the world, to accommodate the F-16s rolling through, 300 F-16s, the Apache helicopters, the big, huge D-9 bulldozers that Caterpillar makes, the Joint Defense Ammunition kits from Raytheon. Imagine if the GBU bombs and the white phosphorus and the dense metal explosion bombs and the drones and all of the jet fuel that was used by the planes was given free of charge. How big would that tunnel have to be? But you don't have to build a tunnel. You can do it in broad daylight, transfer all this weaponry to Israel. If there were weaponry being given to Hezbollah or Hamas in that proportion by Iran, or can you imagine? Of course you can't imagine it. But we do it every day. Our companies profit from it. Our economy is predicated on it, and our security goes down, 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 down. Because imagine still further in Afghanistan. People in the United States in political places say, well, those people in Al-Qaeda and their supporters are cowards. They hide among the houses of civilians and make the civilians into their human shields, such a cowardly act. And the people in Afghanistan are looking at an unmanned aerial vehicle armed with weapons, and the pilot is kind of hidden inside a trailer 15,000 miles away in Nevada. Oh, such bravery of our people, trying to protect the security of ourselves and the next generations, and building up resentment and antagonism because other people in other lands will never reach parity with our weaponry. Never, ever. And yet they keep getting hit and clobbered. And can you imagine inside Creech Air Force Base, one man is piloting the drone and the other has, maybe a man or a woman, has to do the surveillance, and for 8 hours. When John McCain would hit in Vietnam, he'd hit and then swoop away, but now these drones hover for 8-hour shifts. They can stay out there for 13 hours. So imagine the camera person who can see the faces, and the missile hits, and he sees the people dismembered, and he sees them writhing in agony, and he sees the children in panic if they've survived at all, and he watches as there's no ambulance, and maybe there's no transport, and he's done with his 8-hour shift, and he's been in a war zone, bringing all this information into his mind, into his being, and then he's supposed to go turn the keys in the ignition, and go to the grade school, and pick up his children, and maybe coach the soccer game? Oh no, Bessie, war is not a game. You could all bill me for a therapy session.